I'm Mark Laux, Extension Weed Scientist at Ohio State University. One of the things that can happen some springs, especially if you have a lot of acres and weather isn't necessarily cooperative, is your planting can get ahead of your pre-emergence herbicide application, and so you can end up with emerged corn and emerged weeds without having put your bicep or Residual product or really whatever on that you had planned to put on. So you have options in this situation. One of the things we always want to come back to is years of research really shows that weeds need to be removed in that situation by the time they're about 2 inches tall to minimize your potential for any yield loss. We tend to focus on grass in that situation is what we use to measure the weed population. You may have giant ragweed that's bigger than that, but sort of keep that in mind. Depending on the herbicide, you're also you're up against a size limit on corn. For example, products that contain metallochlor can go over the top of corn up to 5 inches tall. Most of the Residual products can go over the top of corn that's up to 11 inches tall. You have some other precautions. Only a couple of those products are labeled for application in 28%. So you may not have gotten your 28 on either, but you're really not supposed to mix those herbicides with 28 on emerged corn. The exception, I think, there is degree extra. Most of the other ones labels flat out say don't do it. So of course when we're in a situation like this one's sort of pushing the window a little bit. We have some grass that's bigger than 2 inches, and in a lot of cases you're just shooting for a spike to 2-leaf application on this, and if you're using something like Corvus or Corvus atrazine, it has to go on before 2-leaf corn. So make sure you check labels or the weed control guide to see what your restrictions are there. And then obviously the next thing is, will my pre-emergence herbicide program handle the weeds that are out there without some help? If you have Liberty Link or a glyphosate resistant Roundup Ready corn, you obviously can put some Liberty or Roundup with that, and that's a really good solution. You have some other things that you can do there. So atrazine covers sort of a lot of sins there, and the products that have a pretty high rate of atrazine will take out a lot of broadleaf weeds. Grasses tend to be a little bit more of an issue. Atrazine's pretty good on grass up to an inch and a half with oil, and they have issues applying some of those products with oil and things like that. So the easiest thing to do is just add something that to it, a regular post-emergence herbicide, whether it's glyphosate or Liberty, or one of the other ones that are available, Impact, Laudis. You've got some other choices you can do there. Again, just make sure you check labels, and make sure the herbicide program that you eventually apply does address the weeds that you have based on what's there and what size it is, and that'll sort of keep you out of trouble. So one of the things to watch out for in this situation, though, and we've seen this in our research plots, is we always try to get our pre-emergence herbicides in a tilt situation on the day of planting, because we're trying to maximize the chances to get a good rain on that, right? So one of the other things you can get into sometimes is you've got the corn planted, it's coming up, you got some weeds that are sort of maybe lurking below the surface or just ready to come up, and you decide, okay, I'm going to go apply some herbicide now because I haven't had a chance to do it, and then you don't get a rain for another 10 days and the weeds poke through there and your herbicides, pre-emergence herbicides, didn't have a chance to work. So you can make there's a judgment call in there that comes into play. If you're early enough, spike to 2-leaf, whatever, and you've got some rain coming, it may not matter. We have suggested in the past that maybe the thing to do in that situation where there's no rain coming and the weeds are just lurking there ready to come through is wait and let the first flush come through, as we have here, and go ahead and hit that first flush with your whatever premix you're using with some glyphosate or whatever you need to put with it. And that way you've got the first flush. You run a little bit of risk of some yield loss if you get rain at that point and they get away from you, but it's just a little bit of a caution to watch in that transition situation where the weeds are ready to come through, but they're not fully through yet, so your herbicide's not going to have foliar activity, and you're still dependent on rain to get them washed down through to get some control. Obviously in a tilt situation, that's a relatively straightforward thing to manage. In a no-till situation, if you haven't done anything and you've got corn emerged, it gets a little bit more difficult. You still have a broad spectrum of herbicides to work with, but you're going to have that spectrum of no-till overwintered weeds that can just be tougher. You may need to add some dicamba or 2,4-D, and there are some restrictions on that regarding rate and timing. 2,4-D especially, labels generally recommend applying 7 to 14 days before, or not until 3 to 5 days or 7 days after planting. It varies a little bit by label. Again, one of the situations you can get into there is the corn is just lurking under the ground. You go put 2,4-D there, you get a rain, you wash it down, the 2,4-D has some impact on the corn. Once the corn's emerged in the spike, the very small stage, it tends to be very tolerant of 2,4-D. Again, you have to be a little bit cautious in the no-till situation because you're going to have a more comprehensive mix of herbicides, and you have to watch adjuvants. You're trying to maximize your adjuvants, or make sure your adjuvants are appropriate to get maximum herbicide activity, but you also, with emerged corn, with a more comprehensive mix in that situation, have more tendency to burn corn if you don't use the right adjuvant. So again, you can check the weed control guide, you can check labels. If you're in doubt using a specific company's product, I always recommend contacting the product rep, manufacturer's rep, to get a recommendation from them in that particular situation, especially to make sure you don't use the wrong adjuvants or something like that.